Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Daily BizLink. Today, Stacie Mallen is back, and we are talking about how you can prepare your leaders for authentic and real conversations. So, Stacie, thanks for being here.
Thank you. This came up a lot this week, and so it's always top of mind as we jump into these Tuesday conversations of what's feeling relevant. And what's become really interesting for me is the concept of vulnerability and authenticity. Organizations asking people to show up that way. And yesterday, I sent out to a big group of women the Brene Brown, TED Talk on vulnerability. And I think she just frames it up so beautifully. But then I started thinking, and then what, right? And so everybody shows up with their vulnerable, authentic selves on a screen. Have we prepared our leaders to what to do in those situations? And so have you had that happen recently? Because I've heard a lot of people having this happen. So has that happened for you, Lindsay?
It has, and I almost hate to admit it because, we do so much work in this space, but it certainly has, it's happened. And I don't think we necessarily know the perfect way to how to handle these situations.
Yeah, and it brings to mind, I had a client, a group of executives, and they were, I won't say specifically what the area was in, but they were all engineers, very much MIT educated engineers. And so we started having, this is back at the beginning of COVID, and we started talking about people are going to come with their stuff right now. They don't have the ability to separate out what they're feeling. And then when they get on a one-on-one with you, some people have a hard time compartmentalizing. And so we started to have these conversations about vulnerability and authenticity. And I was doing coaching calls after the fact. And so many of them were like, yeah, I have like 10 situations I need to talk to you about today, because people were coming with their stuff and we were asking them to be vulnerable and authentic, but we didn't really tell them how to do that, how to handle it. And so thinking about too, when you're leading women specifically, as whether you're a man or a woman in a leadership role, and we are asking women to show up in more vulnerable ways, how do you receive that? So the short story, and it seems so easy, right, to listen. And we talked about the advice monster before, but I think that is the key. And that's the skill set that I started helping to teach these engineers. And so the first thing I told them to do is to shut down their advice monster completely, like shut it down and tie it up and put it to the side. And listen, and instead of saying just listen, engage with curiosity in the conversation. So I asked them to start taking notes when they're on the call. Note body language, note what words people, so writing it down, just being mindful. So I think a starting point for a lot of people is just that. It's sometimes perception is reality. And when we're writing things down, we are processing that information. So one of the first tips I always give to leaders is, as you're having a one-on-one with people, take notes and really not just note kind of what they're saying, how they're saying it, what language are they using, how are they showing up today, what energy do they have, like really with curiosity, talking to this person and really dissecting in some ways, how that conversation is going. And what happened for these group of engineers was kind of magical. A few sessions in, coaching sessions, a lot of them came back and said, the feedback I'm getting is people are really wanting to do the one-on-ones maybe every week instead of every other week. And so they were getting a lot of positive feedback. And I don't think they understood why, but I started talking to them about the fact that people really just want to be heard. So the first thing when we're asking people to be vulnerable and authentic, if your organization is doing that, is prepare your leaders to listen and prepare your leaders to help people feel heard and to not always jump in to the advice. So that would be my top tip at this point as we're starting to prepare leaders for whatever the future of work looks like, maybe 50-50 in office and virtually like we are now, or whatever that looks like for your organization. It's a skill set that's pretty universal.
And on that same train of thought, I'm just curious, do you have any advice about how you can make individuals or team members feel more comfortable with being authentic?
Yeah, so psychological safety, this is a big buzzword prior to 2020. Everybody was talking about psychological safety. What's interesting about psychological safety is it's based in the premise of trust, and trust is based in the premise of vulnerability. So it's like this vicious cycle. And we're asking people to be vulnerable in a place where maybe there's not trust and psychological safety developed inside of with the leader. Because ultimately, to be vulnerable, we all have a fight or flight response, and we have to start talking about how do we get people to talk about the why behind why they react the way that they do. So if you're coaching someone or you're having a one-on-one with someone and you're trying to talk them through a situation that happened and they maybe didn't get a good response for someone, it's an opportunity to create greater vulnerability, because you can start asking them, okay, what were you feeling at that time and why? Do you know why? Why do you feel that way? What about it in your past? And I'll share in my conversation with we did the book club, the Loyalist team. And I started at the end of our conversation, hour-long conversation, I said, does anybody want to share why they are not feeling like they can show up as a loyalist, meaning they don't feel safe to share with their leader? Can anybody tell me why? So I think it's a journey. I'm not going to say that that's a one conversation, but that connection of trust and vulnerability is really what creates the psychological safety for people to open up and share. Even share an idea, forget deep emotional past, just share, like, I have an idea on a concept, and feel safe to share that information. So I think that is starting to ask people to dig a little deeper about why maybe for them to even think and process why they react the way that they do. So that's like a 2.0 coaching habit, but ultimately, I think that's, if you want to have that vulnerability and trust with your team, you've got to get to people's why and help them get there.
I hate to make our conversation go too long, but there's just so much good stuff around this specific topic. I'm curious, like, for leaders, how can they lead by example when it comes to being authentic? Do you have any tips there?
Yes. So one thing that I asked my group of engineers to do is have a few stories, have a few examples where you're also safely sharing vulnerability. So I know it seems a little, pre-planned or trite, but it's helpful. So if they could really get comfortable, what are you comfortable sharing about your life? What are you comfortable sharing about what's going on in your life right now with your family, your partner, your struggle that you're having? But really be prepared with some of those examples, and as the opportunity presents itself, not as advice, but as sharing in the space of, I can understand how you're feeling that way. This is what's going on for me. So when it's not comfortable for people to share that organically, I think having a few things in your mind that you're comfortable sharing as a starting point is always the best way to start down that road with people. So and because the person in front of you has no idea that you prepared this example in advance, it's going to feel like you're being vulnerable, and you are, you're sharing something. It's going to feel better to the other person in that you're sharing something.
Awesome. Well, some additional really great advice coming from Stacie Mallen again today. So Stacie, appreciate you shedding some insight on this specific topic. I know a lot of organizations are trying to think of how they can help their leaders to upskill, and this seems to be one perfect area in which they can do that. So Stacie, as always, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Have a good Tuesday.